Hi, good morning.
Uh, Sorry, hello everyone. I have a question about content, and I have a bit problems with it. And also, I have a question. Will be later possible for add add blocks like no text, only text blocks, or some blocks which you create for maybe news, and after that connect to content block.
Yeah, we could discuss it. It wasn't the idea to enable the content, to like the data blocks for this hackathon, but if you think it would make a difference, we could walk you through it. So let's take a look. It's definitely a possibility. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Um, hey everyone, welcome to the week 4 kickoff. Um, we had a big week. It's been really awesome seeing people dive in and starting to publish content. Um, so great work, everyone. It's been really great to see. We've been getting responses to the week 3 forum. About half of the active participants have submitted so far. So I know that this week there was a little bit more to jump into. We had to kind of learn some new things. Um, Great job everyone there for doing that. So the goal for this week, week 4, so we've got 2 weeks left. So congrats everyone for making it this far. Goal for this week is to publish on mainnet. So far, you've been able to get things tested out on your test nets, and looks like most people have been successful with that. And this week, we want to start transitioning over to the mainnet. There's a few things that we want to do before we start doing that. And there's a few tools that we've made available and that we want to make sure that everybody knows how to use. The first thing is last week we released these GRC-20 utilities, right? The GRC-20 library. And then throughout the week, we extended that with some additional functions. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to dive in and play around with those. Um, the README includes the details. So initially we had some low-level functions to make triples and relations. And then we added some nicer higher level functions for create property, create type, create entity. And hopefully this is a pretty easy to use API. The example flows, and when we can now create larger amounts of knowledge, hopefully simply enough where, we're exposing the structure of GRC-20, uh, but hopefully it's more convenient to use that way. At this stage, we only have these utilities in TypeScript. So, if there's anyone who's, bigger into Python or something like that, we would certainly accept contributions for a port of that library in Python. But for now, hopefully people can make their way with TypeScript. The next thing that we're going to be releasing um, potentially today or tomorrow is Parquet import tools. So Parquet is a tabular format that's very efficient. And so just like with CSVs, you can import, essentially a table. Parquet lets you do the same thing, and it uses even less space than CSV, and it has other um, nice properties. And so that's what we're going to be using for bulk imports. So, if you have, under 1,000, even, under 100, a few hundred entities, it's no big deal to just publish the triples. But if you have a large amount of content, Parquet is definitely going to be the way to do those bulk imports. So we'll see if we have time in this call, we might go over that. Um, And then the last thing is this full text search. We made that API available last week. I think right now it's just on the test net. And I think we need to make that available on the main net. But the idea is you want to extend your scripts so that if you're creating things, you're looking first for existing projects. And I'm not sure exactly what the best workflow is for this because I don't know that you can automatically just assume like the top result is the result. But let's say, for example, that you're doing crypto jobs and the job refers to a project. You want to check first to make sure that the project doesn't exist. Um, right. If the project exists already, you want to use the existing ID. So that's an example of where we want to use full text search. Now, of course, this is on the mainnet, right? So for example, there's a bunch of crypto projects already on mainnet. So you want to be aware generally of what content is already on the mainnet, and try to use a full text search to make sure that you're reusing existing IDs. Um, so that's some of the tools. And so the goal for this week is to publish on mainnet. And that's going to start by creating a personal space on the mainnet. So right now, people have been publishing directly to the testnet. And what we're going to do is we're going to start giving people access to creating a personal space on mainnet one by one, individually. So make sure that you submit your week 3 form. We might have a little bit of feedback, and we want to iterate on the test net before we move over to the main net. So, keep an eye out from emails from us with feedback, and we'll iterate on the test net. And right, the goal for week 3 was even to just have a single entity of each type that's published on the testnet, and that gives us something concrete to look at. We can check to make sure you're using the right property IDs, entity IDs, things like that. Once we think it looks good and you get the okay from us on the testnet, we will send you an early access link to create your personal space on the Geo mainnet. And at that point, you'll be able to actually create an account and use the UI for Geo. Then we'll have you organize, your personal space, make that, look decent, and then you can request to join a public space. So each of you will be essentially editors of the relevant public spaces. Um, and so that brings us to the topic of governance, which we haven't discussed yet, but I'm going to walk a little bit through now. So I'm going to walk through and do a bit of a demo to get people up to speed a little bit about how to use the Geo user interface. Um, and then I'll also talk through governance. While I pull this up, Arturas, would you mind also pinging Byron? Because I think I guess I just realized he's not only the hackers I think got the link to this meeting. So it'd be good to send him the link so you can join. Okay, so this is Geo Genesis. We've looked at this, and what I want to show a little bit is how to use the user interface to create content. So I'm going to start in my personal space. So you guys are familiar with personal spaces now. When you have permissions to edit a space, you'll have a toggle up here to switch between browse mode and edit mode. And so I'm going to just create a new entity. Explorations. And so now I have a new entity here. And right, we have the content area and we have the properties. And I'm going to start by just showing a little bit about the content area. So people have started to ask already, And so you probably figured out by now that up here you can write any valid markdown, right? So you have a title, add content here. We have this kind of slash notation, or it's not really notation, but it's like a shortcut, right? So you can see different types of things that you could add here. So you can add images, and you can add data. And let's take a look, for example, at adding a data block. So by default, when you create a data block, there are different data source types. And by default, what you create is a new collection. So a collection is basically just a way to add any type of entity to a list. So this is essentially a list, and in this list, I could add artists, I could add restaurants, I could add, jobs, I could add whatever I want to this list using find or create. So that's collections. Alternatively, I could switch to have different data sources where I could query a specific space or I could query all of Geo. It's better if you select a specific space because then, it's later on indexers are going to be able to choose what data they want to index, and not every indexer is going to have, is going to be indexing the entire graph. So being more specific will be a lot more efficient than kind of querying all of Geo. But there is going to be also a global index where you can query all of Geo. So this is why when we query all of Geo, right, it says fields are limited to name, description, types, cover, and avatar. So those are essentially fields that are part of the global index, and you can query that. So for now, let's just say we're going to query all of Geo. And it looks a little bit funky right now. We could probably improve the initial filter a little bit. But what we want to do then is start filtering. And the first thing you want to filter on is the types. Right, so let's say that what we want to find is some job openings. So I can start searching here, right? And it's going to find, types that I can filter on, and then I hit done. Boom, and now it's showing me job openings, right? Or let's say I wanted to filter on for the types to show just news stories. Now this is going to be harder because we don't have good ranking here. So I think we could probably, let's see, so these are good things to navigate. So if we find a news story, I think we can paste an ID, and let's try that and see if it works. So here I can see what the news story type is. And we are having some issues this morning, I think, with some duplicates and things. So we're gonna have to debug that. Let me come here. So the types is, there we go. So you can paste in an ID here as well if for some reason you can't find the one you're looking for. And then now we're querying for news stories. From here, you can set different views. So we start out with a table view, but you could also display this as a gallery, or you could display it as a list. So these are kind of different views, and by default, the list here, right, it basically shows you the name, the description, and either the cover or the avatar. And if you had like a table, you could, for example, edit the properties. And you can choose additional properties that you want to show, right? So maybe you want to show the related projects. And now you could see, right, for each news story, Here are the related projects. So this is a bit about data blocks. Some more advanced features, since you guys are going to be more advanced. There is this view config here. So if you click on this, what you're seeing here is actually the relation to this, or actually, I'm not sure why it's showing up like this. This should be the data block. So this is the data block, and there should be a type. I wonder if the name is gone. So this should be the data block. And what you can see here is the data source type right now, right, is set to all of Geo. It could have been a specific space, or it could have been a like a collection. And then here you can see essentially the filter that's being run. So if sometimes it's helpful to kind of inspect the block itself, and you can do that there. And then here you can see the block relation. And so the block relation is the thing that has the index, right? Essentially, you have a block entity, and then adding the block entity to the entity through a blocks relation is what adds it to the page, right? That's what adds it to that content area, right? So the from entity, so this is kind of the block, the to entity, this is that's the entity. Sorry, the from is the entity that we were adding the content to. The to is the block, and then we have an index, and for example, the view, right? So the view, the fact that it's a table or it's a gallery, is a property of the block relation. So here I basically just walked through the specifics of data blocks. So now people know generally how it works. The main thing to kind of keep in mind there, right, was first you wanted to set the types. And then once you set the types, you can add additional filters based on the properties of that type. And so you want to kind of set up your filters in that way. The other thing that you can do, the different block type, is you can query relations. So where do I work? So that's another filter that you can set. But it doesn't work on collections. It works on when you're doing queries. So I can say, okay, I want to query, why don't we query like my personal space? And then I can add filters. Now what I can do is I can switch this instead of entities. I can say I want to show relations. And then I can put in a relation type. So I can put in, for example, works at. And now I should be, what's the data source? Is it the right one? Relation type is works at from, oh, it shouldn't have from explorations. Should be from unique. There we go. So I put the from myself, and then the relation type is works at, and now it's showing all of the relations from myself where I work at, right? So these are all the places that I work. From here again, I can switch the view. So now I'm displaying that as a list. So I can see that I work at the graph. I can see that I work at Geo. And then with relations, there's this additional kind of way to set which properties you want to display. So by default, what it's doing here is it's displaying the details of the entity the relation is pointing to, right? So if I work at the graph, if I work at Geo, right, the entities I'm pointing to are the graph and Geo. And here it's showing the name of the graph, the description of the graph, and an image for the graph, right? It's the cover. but I can control that. So I can come to the properties and I can put other things that I want to display here, right? So maybe, for example, for the description, instead of the description of the graph, maybe I want to add a description of my working relationship. So what I can do here is, right, this is the from entity, this is the relation, and this is the to. So I can select like the relation entity and I can say, okay, I want the description. So now I'm writing the description of the works at relation. I could also add, for example, my roles, and we are having issues right now with the duplicates, so ignore that. Or maybe like when I started working there. So on Geo, I have a date here. This is when I started working at Geo, and I don't have one on the graph. It's 2017. And so this is how you can display relations. And those are all some pretty advanced features. So we've dived into the blocks, how to create different types of data blocks, the different data sources, how to set the properties and relations on those. Any questions about data blocks?
Quick question, can you set the relation type or set the to address from the relation type instead? Like if I wanted to see all the people who work at Geo.
Right now, we do not have that, and that is a valid question. Well, the way we would do that, we could totally add it to this. Now, I wonder if we look at the view config. Essentially, that would be this filter, and you could actually go in and you could probably change from it's probably this one, from the from to the to attribute ID, and it would work. But I think we haven't exposed that in the UI. The other thing that you would do if you want to do it the other way around, well, because relations are bidirectional. So there should be relations also the other way, from Geo to the people who work at Geo. So then it would be, okay, show me the team member relations from Geo. So that's a way you could do it, but it is totally valid to want to do it on two. And I don't remember why we didn't add it here, but it's a good question. I think it's worth adding. I think it's confusing because you'd only want to add one of the two, but we could have like a little drop down here and then you could switch it like from and between from and to. Cool. Okay, so that's data blocks. So a few more things to just kind of show about the UI. So let's say I wanted to create a new type of thing. Let's say I wanted to create a paper. So I click the paper type, and what you see is, right, it adds the relevant properties that are defined on the paper type. So I can add them in. Now, by default, it's going to select the appropriate types here, right? So for example, if I go to cover, here's the cover property, right? It's in the geo space, which is the root space. And I can see it has a value type of image. And because it has a value type of image, edit mode. Because it has a value type of image, this is selected to the image value type. Same with published date, right? It's showing a time. Published in is showing a relation. And when you do this, so let's look at published in. See, this is value type relation. And then with relations, you can also want to set this relation value types, which tells you essentially what types of thing can this be. So right now we're saying that papers can be published in journals. Now you could add other potentially valid relation value types, right? You could say it could be published in a journal, or maybe just like, I don't know if you would say that it's a publisher, but maybe there's like a magazine or something like that, or and if there isn't a magazine, you could create a new, magazine or something. So you can have many relation value types. And and that helps with kind of the find or create. So a lot of times, basically, if you're looking here for something, you're using the UI. In this case, because the relation value type has journal as a valid relation value type, it filters by default to show me the journals. In the future, we can have a UI here that makes it so that you can have like full control over this. But right now, it always kind of filters to the relation value types that you set. And so that's something to be aware of. If you're searching for something for relations, that's what you want to know. And then you can hit the plus here if you want to add free-form properties, right? So let's say that on this paper, it wouldn't necessarily make sense, but let's say I want to set the roles or something like that on the paper. I can add any property here. By default, it's going to set it to text, right? But maybe I want to, roles is a relation. So always make sure that the value type here is set to the right value type that you want, and then you can start searching for roles. And there are roles, and you could add multiple. So that's kind of the stuff you need to know about the properties and using the UI for that. And so between setting the properties, relations, right, having find or create for relations, we've already looked at navigating to relation types and use this X here if you want to remove a relation. So that works well. The last thing that I should note is, and this is part of why we haven't opened up Geo more publicly yet, there's still just a little thing, a few things that are kind of rough around the edges, right? So here, when you publish, you see the diffs. Some of the diffs still look a little bit wonky, like the main content changes and property changes, those look fine, but there's still a few things around the edges where, it shows up as relations or whatever. Also, we used to have the ability to select or deselect specific changes to publish. And right now, that is not fully hooked up. So what you can do is you can see the edit count is most likely wrong at the moment. And basically, you can either publish it as is, right? You add a name to your proposal. Or you can hit delete all if you've made some mistakes. Right now, essentially, you'd have to delete your changes, and then that resets your state. So that is kind of the current state of the user interface, and it is pretty powerful. And based on that, you could do things like set up your personal space. You could go in and you can update public spaces. So for our personal spaces, we do have a template that shows up when you create a personal space, or that we can set for the different types of spaces that configures the initial space layout. What we would like to see for all personal spaces is, I think goals is potentially a little bit ambitious for most people to try to set, here are my goals or here are my missions, right, is really what this is meant to be. What are the missions that you're working on? But for sure, posts, people have things like blog posts, and then your current work and your past work. So that we want to have for everybody. So this would be a good thing. And both of these are using the relation blocks that I showed. So you'll want to set that up for yourself. And essentially, right, those map to these, which you have here. So if you add works at or worked at properties, and you go in and you update those relations, and then you can display them in your on the content. We think that's a good way to show that. And then it would be nice to add kind of, roles, skills. If you want, you could add values, but really, roles and skills. And at that point, avatar, optionally cover, and a description. At that point, you've got a pretty good personal space. If you're active on X, you can add your X, right, as a URL. And that's what a good personal space would look like. So once you've created your personal space and you think it's looking good, send it over to us. And the next thing you can do is request to join a public space. So I've gone in over the weekend and I've added some public spaces. So we're doing stuff with some industry, some regions, some education. So for example, let's look at education. We had these academic fields. I'll probably change what this homepage looks like, but what I added is actually a subspace for academic fields, specifically under education. So the thinking here is education can include primary and higher education. And then if you click on the academic fields, you see subspaces for these academic fields. So right now we've got folks working on papers and courses and things related to computer science, math, philosophy, finance, chemistry, and history. These are some of the ones that are active. And so there's public spaces that have been created here that are just waiting for you. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with all of this duplicates. So it's a substreams issue. And Byron should be able to jump on this and figure out what's going on with our substreams, which is indexing duplicates. So that should be an easy fix, but apologies for seeing that. Okay, so here we've got public spaces, which, it uses the template for an academic field, right? So right now there's some placeholders for these blocks, for news, courses, papers, people, ontology about schools. And by default right now, I created these spaces, so I'm the only editor and I'm the only member. But once you create your personal space, you can request to join. And what I would actually say is for the time being, request to join as a member. And then at the end of the hackathon, I can make you an editor. And that'll just make it so we can move a little bit faster. Actually, I think with 2 editors, it should be easy enough. But let me talk through the governance process a little bit. So public spaces have public governance. And for example, with the crypto space, we can see that there are 17 members and there are 3 editors. And you can click here on the governance tab and you can see past proposals and you can see who voted. So here was a proposal to add a project to the crypto space. And we can see that Arturis and Armando both voted and they accepted. So 100% of the editors approved. And so this proposal went through. So right now we have a default governance process. In the future, we want this to be customizable so that different spaces can choose their own rules for governance. But right now, all of these spaces, you're either a personal space or a public space. And the way that the public spaces work is the members can basically have edit mode permissions, right? So that once you become a member, you can toggle into edit mode and you can, make changes to the pages and you can submit those proposals and they become a proposal, right? So it shows up like this and it goes to a vote and people vote. So here's an active proposal. Armando's the only one that voted on this. And so this one has 4 hours left. And then it'll either be accepted or rejected. By default, we think a 24-hour period is probably good for most spaces for these voting periods. And we think that's nice because you can have editors that are all over the world. And that gives them a chance. You have a 24-hour period. So no matter where you are, what time zone you're in, you'll have a chance to kind of review during your workday. And we think that's a good cadence. Now, at the beginning, we want to keep the number of editors low so we can move a little bit faster because we have something that's called like early execution. And so with early execution, if more than 50% of the editors vote and they approve, then the proposal can go through right away. And so you don't actually have to wait for the voting period to be over. So as soon as 2 out of 3 editors approve, a proposal goes through. If you don't have 50% of the editors voting, then you wait until the end of the voting period, and the result is whatever 50+% of the editors voted for, right? It's not of the total editors, but it's of the editors that voted, right? So if you have 10 editors total and only 3 voted, let's say 2 voted for, 1 voted against, then that proposal will be approved, right? Because 2 out of the 3 that voted approved. So it's a majority of those that voted. And as long as you hit quorum, and the quorum is just 1 other editor. So if you propose something and there's a public space, if you're the only editor, then you can propose something and it goes through right away. If you're not the only editor, then you need at least 1 other person to approve your changes before it can go through for a public space, right? And so that makes it so that you have to get review for your work. There's always at least 1 pair of eyes that is taking a look at your work. And so people know if they're looking at something that is in a public space, right, it's gone through this sort of a process, at least 1 other person reviewed it. Any of the other editors of that space had a chance to review it, and you could see, you know, who approved or who disagreed with the changes. And there's a record of that. Are there any questions about that? I know I just covered a lot, and there's a few more details that I can fill in, but maybe that's a good place to ask for questions on governance.
Is there an incentive mechanism built into this?
There is not. So yeah, I saw you asked in the week 3 form about incentives. So would love to discuss more about incentives. In general, we are exploring mechanisms in the protocol for incentivizing people who are organizing knowledge. So that is an active area of research and something that we would like to do, that we're working on. Details are TBD. It's something that core devs are looking at. How the editors versus the members should be compensated, like these are interesting questions and the specifics, and you know, keep an eye out for proposals in the forum. I think it'd be great to get public input, and you guys would be in a great position to provide input on that. So keep an eye out for that.
Additionally, I wanted to ask, so it seems like bundling as many of these edits together as possible saves on gas fees. Does that cause a governance problem as like somebody in, like, if you can't break up the approve or deny, then you have these like massive uploads. It's hard to identify like one small issue in it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and a lot of it is tooling, and we do need to kind of, you know, improve the tooling. So it'll help to have more help on this stuff as we kind of grow this. But yes, part of what we would want to do is probably have a flow like GitHub where you can request changes. I like essentially this is really like GitHub for knowledge, right? And so like a flow when you submit a PR on GitHub, right? There's the PR is open, people can request changes, you can request, you know, you update that thing. Now there could be issues if there's a voting period and you changed it, right? There could be questions, does that restart the clock? You know, you still need to make sure that people have a chance to review it. I think it does make sense to reset the clock. But essentially then, yeah, the proposal itself is either accepted or rejected. And you're right. So you have to find the right kind of balance there. It does help to batch it up, but you don't want to just batch it up just to save on gas. It's the same thing as submitting a PR. If you submit a PR that's too big in GitHub, a reviewer might ask you to break it up, right? Because maybe it's too much work for a reviewer to review just a massive PR. So, I think there will be good hygiene things that kind of come out of this where people kind of figure out what is a good general size for a proposal that is reasonable for a reviewer to review.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say back to that is that needs to be abstracted away from the gas problem because, yeah, breaking things up to GitHub makes a ton of sense, but you're not paying per transaction. In this case, you're going to be paying per transaction, essentially, and especially if we're talking about financial incentives and things like that, you need to allow optimization on the gas front, but also enable the ability to break it up. So could I submit this huge proposal that has like tags in it to break it up for a reviewer? Right. Could
Yeah,
I
one thing to clarify is when we talk about, the gas, first of all, it's not so much dependent on the size. Now, maybe in the future we might price storage based on size, but that's fairly marginal. As far as the gas goes itself, I mean, and I think you're saying this as well. The gas cost is not dependent on the size of the knowledge. And it's not very expensive, right? So like we'll see what this looks like at scale. But this is also meant to be able to be like very well sharded, right? So you could run different spaces on different layer twos, on different layer threes. And so ultimately what I would expect, the price of a transaction to be well below a cent. You could call it 1 cent, but I think it's even less than that. I think it's a tenth of a cent. And so I don't think that that's going to drive people's behavior to save a fraction of a penny.
Okay, so just from my experience working on testnet, it's like Byron sent over like $150 worth of testnet ETH and already burned through like over 100 of it. So it's like
Is
on our
that right? That should not be. So I'm not sure what the testnet ETH conversion is. I'm not sure why it's ETH even because on RL3 the native token is GRT.
is it we don't have to dive into this too much right now. I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, they're great questions. But that's what I would say is it's not going to be that expensive. So I'm not sure what's happening on the testnet, but you can very much assume that a transaction is like under a cent.
Perfect.
Sweet. Okay, so that's governance. All right, so that should kind of cover basically how to create a personal space, how to use a user interface to create content, organize content. Once you do that and you find your space, right? So let's say that I'm doing jobs for real estate. We added some industries here for real estate, for agriculture, for law. All right, so if someone is doing something in real estate, they would click here and they would request to join. So you'd come here and you'd see a little join button to request as a member. I'll approve you, and then you can propose changes to the real estate space. It'd be great to actually go through once you're a member of a space and actually see if you can update these blocks. Essentially you'll publish your knowledge to the space, and then you can update the blocks so that they kind of render the correct knowledge for the different things that you're doing. So maybe you're adding, jobs, or maybe you're adding like roles and skills and things, make sure that they show up properly under the jobs tab. If you have specific types or properties that you've defined for your industry, you can add that in the ontology tab. And you can clean up your space and just kind of make it look good. So that's really the goal for week 4. One thing to note is to only publish knowledge on mainnet that's been validated on testnet. So we really want to use a testnet to test. And then once things look good there, you get the okay from us, then publish it to the mainnet. And I would recommend going slowly. You know, we don't want to necessarily publish like 1,000 entities all in one go. It's possible that we find, you know, maybe we miss that one of the property IDs was off or something like that. So I definitely recommend with these things, you know, especially initially, start slow, maybe publish 5 entities at a time, see how it looks, make sure that it looks good. And once you've done 5 or 10, then okay, if you've got 1,000, then you publish the 1,000. But we want to do it in little steps, and we want to kind of test and get eyes on it and make sure it looks good before we blast out a ton of content on the mainnet. Another thing you might see is if you click on this, and if you're expecting to see something and you're not seeing it, it could be
Yes.
because you're in the wrong space. This is for
Okay.
everybody. So remember that we have pluralism. So in this case, there's a view of math that's in the education space, and then there's a view of math that's in the math space. So you can always check to see which space you're in if you're not seeing what you expect. And then in the future, we're going to work on having better ranking, right? We want to have ranking of spaces so that it kind of is default selected to a good space for you. So next steps, make sure you get your week 3 form approved. Submit that if you haven't. We'll provide feedback. And then once we think everything looks good, we'll send you the link to create your personal space. You can go through, create your personal space the way that I showed today. You know, try to make it look as nice as you can. That'll be really great. Let us know if you have any issues or questions. Then you can request to join a public space as a member. Hopefully we've already created the public space that you're working on. If you think that you should be publishing to a space that doesn't exist yet on the mainnet, let us know, and we can get that created for you. We do not need to have this twice. And then we've got the office hours again, Wednesday, 10 a.m. So hopefully that time works for people. If we need to find another time to hop on, I'm happy to hop on. But that's a great opportunity to show what you've been working on, ask questions, get feedback. All right. Do people have any questions?
I wanted to ask a bit about subspaces. So when you're creating subspaces, like what type of entities would you want to have subspaces of, and what type of entities wouldn't you?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so the way that I think about subspaces, and this could evolve, but is that you generally want them to have the type of their parent space so that it's basically like a drilling down sort of experience, right? So here we have regions, and essentially the region space, you could think of this as the top level one kind of being like for the whole globe. And then you want to drill down. So the subspaces ideally are essentially of that same type. So they're also regions, and you're just kind of drilling down into more and more specific regions, right? So I can drill down into North America. I drill down further into United States, drill down further into California, SF Bay Area, and finally I'm in a city. Maybe you can go further into neighborhoods. So to me, that's how the subspace relationship works best. So with industries, you'd kind of have, you know, sub-industries. You can usually break down industries. Like the crypto industry is pretty big. And right now I want to add kind of like DeFi, for example, or infrastructure as subspaces. Those are also industries, right? It's like the DeFi industry or something, right? It's a subspace of the crypto industry. with academic fields, you can drill down. So that, math is a big field, right? There could be a whole subspace for, uh, calculus. So that's how I think about subspaces. Now, the other thing you can do, and we're working on this now, is verified spaces. And so you could still have, essentially what we want to do is create this web of trust. And you can have a space verify other spaces. And in a sense, right now, it becomes part of their almost subgraph in a sense, because it's been verified, but maybe it's not through the subspace relationship. And so that's something that we want to, we'll be adding and we can demo and discuss as well.
So one question on that is, it's like, if you look at, say the law space, and would you want to have a subspace for courts, or would you want that just to be an entity type? And at the same time, would you want a subspace for like judges, where a judge might not only be associated with that law space, but they are also a person, right? So can you have multiple subspaces associated with you?
Yes, yes, you can. And I think that makes sense to, like if you look at the US government, there's the three branches, right? Each of those would kind of be their own spaces. And then under that, you can keep drilling down. So yeah, you just want to be thoughtful around like when there's a bunch of subspaces, I think the main question is like, are you consistent in how you're segmenting from the space above to the subspaces? And ideally, right, that's where someone just like it is kind of like ontologies, but it's kind of classification, taxonomy kind of stuff. But yes, it makes sense to have those as spaces, and ultimately, right, there could be the question of like where does it make sense to have it as a subspace? But at the end of the day, like if there's a separate community and it's a specialization and there's a set of people that should be kind of managing themselves and organizing content that's relevant to them, then it does for sure make sense to have as its own space.
Okay, then last question on that. When you publish to the test net right now, we're setting transactions with a space ID. So does that designate what space it is, or do we need to make, or does that just designate where we're publishing it from? And then we need to make relations from that entity to those different subspaces.
Well, that's the space that you're publishing to. So if you want to publish to different spaces, you need to create those different spaces and then you publish to those different spaces.
Yes, but say I wanted to create a judge entity, and that judge entity would have a space, like it should be a person space, but also a judge space. Right.
Yeah.
So then which
Well, let's
entity?
let's take this convo to Discord. They're great questions. Really great questions, but I just want to be cognizant of time here.
Yep.
So we'll keep that going. But great work, everyone, on your week 3 submissions, getting knowledge published to the testnet. It's been really awesome seeing people be successful publishing their content there. Hopefully, you've had a chance to play around with the new utility functions. Please keep an eye out. We'll send details about the Parquet imports. We'd love for people to use the new Parquet import format before we go to the mainnet. So
Um,
details for that over email and Discord.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, on the form you said we should work as a team. So I've sent my data to my tech partner. So I don't know whether I should fill out the form too.
Yes, well, all partnerships are voluntary, right? So we try to help facilitate, make some introductions. If people also, there might be lots of reasons why people might want to work on their own or whatever. So if you don't get a response or something like that, also assume that they're working on their own, or but if you are working together, then a single response is fine.
All right, thank you.
Yep, thank you. All right, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you hopping on. Excited to see all the great progress and looking forward to the week ahead. Should be an exciting one getting this knowledge published on the mainnet. So cheers. Let us know if you have any questions. We're available in the Discord. We're here to help and super excited to see what everyone does this week. Thanks, everyone.